Hey everybody, I'm Matt. If we haven't met, good to have you here. Welcome to Lewisville. So most Sunday mornings when we get here early and we're getting all set up, certainly way before you guys, if you always come to the 11, certainly way before you show up, there's always a group of people in the kitchen making coffee and get everything ready to go. And often we chit-chat about, the week, whatever's going on, and there's a couple ladies who are well into sports, and so often our conversation turns to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Don't boo me off stage if that's not your team, but hold on. So we often talk, and this year we've had not many positive things to talk about. And, we've just kind of chit-chat about it, and then a few weeks ago we were talking about it after a terrible Saturday night showing, and one of them said, just once before I die, which I feel like has always been my thing. So I found this shirt. I think maybe some of you have seen this. Just once before I die. And so I became like a pretty die-hard Leafs fan, I think maybe 9 or 10 years old. And at that point in time, it felt like a sure thing, like surely before I die, the Leafs will win. Now, like almost 40 years later, I'm not so sure anymore. It feels like maybe it would be a wish unfulfilled. So anyways, when I found this picture, I also found a few others that I thought, just for the sake of fun, we almost always almost win. No one's liking these? It hurts my soul a little bit, and then watch this one, patiently waiting since 1967. So, fun fact here, do you know that the last time the Leafs won the Stanley Cup in 1967, there were no McDonald's in Canada? So the Leafs won in May of 1967, and the first McDonald's opened in Canada in June of 1967. That's crazy, right? No McDonald's? What on earth? So anyways, the whole idea of waiting, now I'm just using a sports analogy, but the whole idea of waiting and longing and expectation, we can have fun with it in a sports way. And if you're not a Leafs fan, I know you don't even care. But for me, I kind of will, please God, once before I die. But if we flip it, again, not in just this kind of sports way, but we can tie this idea of longing and waiting and expectation all into the story of Advent. So this is week 1. We begin Advent. We're 4 Sundays out from Christmas. And the idea of Advent is this waiting and longing for the coming, the expected coming and arrival of the Messiah, who we would call Jesus. And so the ancient Jewish people had this longing for centuries of hope and anticipation, believing through God's promises that one day the Messiah would come. And I'm sure every generation would have said, well, certainly not before I die. It's going to happen before I die. And then generation after generation after generation, God, when are you showing up? When is this promised Messiah showing up? How is this all going to work out? In a very serious way. And so today, as we begin week 1, we are going to look at some Old Testament prophecies that all are pointing forward to this hope, this expectation, this rescue that God was going to provide, as a way of setting up and helping our minds remember how this all got started. And sitting with expectation and longing is part of what it means to enter this season well for us. Recognizing, yes, we know Christmas is coming and we're on this side of the story, so we have more information than the ancient Israelites did, but there's still this sense of preparing our hearts and waiting for what God wants to say to us in this season. So that's where we're going to go today. All right, so grab your Bibles if you have them. Genesis chapter 3 is where we're going to start. We're going to bounce around a little bit because we're looking at different prophetic words in the Old Testament. You can use the QR code here on the screen if you just want to use your phone or something to flip around. Also, if you do not have a Bible, we should have some at the back table there. Feel free to jump up and grab one. We want to make sure that you can follow along with us as we get going. Right before I read the first text, I just also want to let you know and just highlight that this week, many of you will receive an email letter that we sent out highlighting our year-end Christmas offering. And for those who were at our finance meeting a few weeks ago, we updated our church membership that we are tracking to end 2025 somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000 behind actual. And so that's a big number. We get it. And so as we've promised, we're always trying to, on a regular basis, give updates throughout the year on how we're tracking financially. And so just letting you know, we're inviting our people here who call Lewisville home to pray and consider and see how you might be willing to partner with us to at least close the gap Every dollar that's given helps us to end in a better place that we anticipate that we're going to end now. Maybe we get all the way there and start 26 flat, kind of flush, but maybe not. But certainly we're inviting our people to pray and consider how you might give. That's in no way to say that our community is not faithful and generous and consistent in your giving. We're just letting you know where we're going and inviting you, if you're able to be a part of that. If you have any questions on that, certainly let us know. I'm not the best numbers person, but I'll put you in touch with all the people who know all those facts and kind of steward that for us, our church. If this is your first time here, I should also say that conversations about the Leafs and money, I hope you come back. Like, it can be a weird thing to show up for the first time. But as a church, we want to always be transparent. It's part of being good stewards and recognizing we're doing this together as a community. And so if you didn't receive that email, it would mean that you're not on our email list. So I invite you to sign up off our website. We also have some printed copies of that letter at the back that you can grab. Oh, and all that is we're culminating and we're kind of pointing people towards Sunday, December 21st, which is the last Sunday before Christmas. And so you don't have to wait to the 21st. You can give online or bring it next week or contact the office to set something up. But since that's our last Sunday, we're kind of driving people towards that date, December 21st. And then the 24th, obviously, is our Christmas Eve services. Okay, ready? All right, Genesis chapter 3, which may feel like a weird place to begin if we're talking about Old Testament prophecies, because it's not specific in the same way the others we're going to look at this morning. It's not the same kind of prophetic word. And let me just set us up before I read it. There's lots of preamble happening here. Forgive me. In case you don't know the story, Genesis chapter 3, it's helping us understand the creation narrative. It's giving us the story of how God called all things into existence. And we're about to read this passage. What's just happened is that God had given instructions to instructions to Adam and Eve that you can eat of the fruit of any tree in this garden, what we call the Garden of Eden. And his instructions were, there's just one tree you don't eat from, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what happens is, what we read as the serpent, what translates as the serpent, which is described as the craftiest and wiliest of all the created animals, comes to Eve. And this is what the serpent says. In Genesis 3:1, it says, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Kind of putting in this seed of doubt. Did God really say that? And they have a little bit of an interaction, to which the serpent then responds to Eve, "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good from evil." And so if you know the story, again, just to make sure we're all at the right spot together, I don't want to leave anyone behind. Adam and Eve disregard and disobey God's instruction. They eat from that fruit. Their eyes are immediately opened, and that unleashes the curse of sin into the world. And we are still dealing today with the consequence of that disobedience, that action. And the whole narrative of Scripture tells us how this is all working itself out. Now, the interesting that I want to point you to is this, in verse 14. Okay, look at this. So God is confronting them about their disobedience. There's consequences to their actions, and he's laying that all out for them. And then we find this really interesting part beginning at verse 14. So here's what God says to them. So God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Can I teach you a little bit of a funky word? You up for something? Say this with me. Proto-evangelium. Okay, so proto-evangelium. Okay, proto-evangelium. So proto is from the Greek word meaning first. And evangelium is from the root word euangelion, which is Greek meaning good news or gospel. So proto-evangelium is this word for first gospel. So when you think of the good news, we often think of Jesus comes to initiate and to share the good news of God, which he does. But scholars and theologians would say this is actually the first gospel hint we get. So even as God is explaining the consequences of their disobedience and sin, even while he's giving judgment and pronouncement on this in this moment, there's this thread of hope that we see. There's this promise that starts emerging right from the very beginning of the story. And again, all throughout Scripture, we see this interplay between the curse of sin that has entered our world through our disobedience and this redemptive hope, this promise that God is going to show up and rescue and save his people, to provide a solution for all this. So it's weird, eh? When we're starting Christmas, they like, man, we're starting in creation. How does that work? We're starting because it's the first glimmer of hope we have. And ultimately, when we retell the Christmas story year after year, we're reminding ourselves that this is the hope we have, that Jesus, when he arrives, is the fulfillment of this hope that God has always promised. And all these instances of prophetic words, of announcing towards the future, it all culminates, it all points to Jesus. And so that's why we're looking at these things. Now, if you notice in the verse, there's a couple interesting things that even as he's planting the seed of hope and there's this judgment, there's a reference here to the seed, the offspring of the woman, which is a forward looking to the coming of Jesus. And the note there is that he will crush your head. And the church throughout history has always viewed this as an example of pointing to the time where you will strike at his heel. So this will be, you'll do your worst to Jesus, the picture of Jesus suffering on the cross, and you will crush his head, which is this notion of putting death to death. You will crush the effects of Satan and sin once and for all. And so it's always been this glimmer of hope, even as we read this text in Genesis chapter 3, which is widely regarded as, it's called the fall, when everything breaks apart, separation between God and his creation. This all happens, but God still, there's consequences, but he still points forward to this ultimate rescue plan, this ultimate hope. Okay, now let's jump into one that's a bit more familiar for you. So probably flip over to Isaiah. It's probably towards the middle of your Bible if you have it, or just keep flipping in your app. So Isaiah, before I read it, a little bit of context. Context is always important. So Isaiah was a prophet, and he was mostly in the area around Jerusalem in the southern part of the kingdom at this point, and he lived around 700 years before Jesus. So a long, long time before Jesus. And the role of the prophet was always to be the voice, the spokesperson for God. So he would often communicate to the kings at this point. He served under 4 different kings, but to the kings and to the people, either a correction and a rebuke. You cannot live this way, you need to turn around and go this way, or to offer words of encouragement for the people about where this was all going. Kind of had this role. And Isaiah, and the two passages we're going to look at from Isaiah are really well known around the Christmas time. He kind of sets the stage on what this all looks like, these prophetic words that are pointing towards the coming of Jesus. What was happening in the time also is really important, because the nation state was being surrounded by foreign empires and enemies, and at this particular point, they were worried that the foreign armies of Assyria were going to come in and conquer them. So there was a great fear among the people, feeling basically the one king feels like all hope is lost, we're going to be taken over, we're going to be destroyed, it's not going to go anywhere. It led them to the temptation to trust in false gods or to take matters into their own hands and forget and believe like God's probably not going to show up. Where are you, God? When will this ever happen? When will the rescue happen? And so they start acting on their own initiative. And Isaiah then comes in as God's messenger, and he's pointing something towards the future. So the first one is Isaiah 7, verse 14. So let's read this together. And you'll know right away, this one glaringly has Christmas tones to it. Isaiah 7:14, it says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Emmanuel." The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and call him Emmanuel. So right away you're probably like, oh yeah, that I've heard that, or that ties to Christmas, my understanding of Christmas. So I've been getting a little bit of flack over the while over my 2 sets of glasses from different people here. I'm not going to stare at you. I think the worst culprit isn't even here, skipping church, but anyways. And it's true. Like when I first got, these glasses are so I can see at a distance. And the first time I got glasses was in grade 9. And I was realizing I was having a real hard time seeing at that point, like the board and sometimes overheads that the teacher would use from that era. And I just couldn't make it out. And so I went to the eye doctor and said, oh, it's because you are nearsighted, which means you can see clearly up close, but you need your glasses to be able to see at a distance. And that's how I have gone through most of my life. Need glasses to see, and also when I first started driving at 16. So I've always just worn glasses. And then about 3 years ago, the eye doctor, when I moved here, gave me the hint that, well, by next appointment, you're going to need to do something about reading. And anyways, so I have these 2 glasses. Now, I admit, I should have just got progressives. Like, it would have been a lot easier, a lot smoother. I probably need to do that. And so I've been catching some flack about the on and off, but it's the only way I can both see you and clearly read. I can kind of read this way, but honestly, this makes it work. I've also heard rumors that there's a bit of an over-under going on most Sundays on how many times I'll put them on and switch glasses, which I thought was like, is my teaching that boring that people are just counting the glasses switching? And I thought, betting. No one at Lewisville is betting. That's just sin. Like, who's betting about the pastor's glasses? Anyways, the funny thing about the nearsighted, farsighted, now I just need both, because I can't see without them either way, is that when we read some of these prophetic words, there are things that made sense in the immediate moment for these people. There was things that made clear sense right in front of them. So when Isaiah is giving these words, it made sense based on the situation they found themselves in. But it wasn't just confined to the local moment. They also have this distant feel. There's this nearsighted, farsighted view of these texts where, yes, it applies here, but ultimately, this is what it's calling and pointing us towards, which I think is, they don't all, but certainly this one does. Certainly chapter 7, verse 14 does have this here and far kind of connotation. Because when he says Emmanuel translates and means God with us. So remember, the context is that they're so fearful of the army coming in and invading and wiping them out. And so when Isaiah comes and gives them this reassurance, don't worry, God is going to be faithful. He's going to show up. It's going to work. And God does as you continue reading the story. The idea of Emmanuel, God with us, it would have been an instant word of encouragement for not only the king, but also the kingdom, the people, that God has not forsaken us. He has not abandoned us. He is here. And it would have made sense for them in the moment. And yet, when you think about what this all looks like, this whole passage from verse 14, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and I will call him Emmanuel. Well, there's none of that. There's God with us showing up. But all this note on, I will give you a sign, a virgin will conceive, give birth to a son, this is all pointing forward to Mary's willingness to participate with God to give birth to Jesus, the main focus of our Christmas story. So there's this long-range picture as well. There's clarity in the immediate, and there's this long-range vision of God dwelling, becoming us, putting on flesh, becoming human. We call it the incarnation, when God becomes human. And so these prophecies are giving us this sense of here, but also way down the line. God will show up. There is this promise that's emerging, not only our first taste of it in Genesis chapter 3, but also now in these texts from Isaiah, that God is faithful. He will show up. It just might not be in the time you want. Remember I was joking, God, please, just once in my lifetime. I imagine they were like, okay, this is a great word, but God, please, in my lifetime. How many more things do we have to go through before you show up? And generation after generation, God, where are you? How long? Would have been their cry. Now it's interesting, in Matthew chapter 1, when Matthew's gospel is talking about the birth narrative, which we'll talk about in coming weeks, he's referencing back. He's tying his account back to Isaiah to show like these are different ends of the same string, but this strand of hope, of promise has always been there. So in Matthew chapter 1, verse 22 and 23, it says this, and all this, meaning the whole birth of Jesus, and all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet Isaiah that we just read. Through the prophet, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. So even as Jesus is born and the people are becoming aware that something special is happening, we're being reminded that this isn't a brand new thing. This isn't just a fluke of history. This has always been part of God's plan. And so Matthew in his gospel is making sure his readers understand that this promise was given hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It just took time to come into fulfillment. Okay, let's look at another one. Flip over a couple pages to Isaiah chapter 9. Again, this might be another familiar one for you. Isaiah 9, verse 6 and 7. very Christmassy. It says this, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever." So this is a really important thing because the people understood this idea that their Messiah, their rescuer, would emerge from the royal bloodline of King David, who was one of the very earliest kings of Israel. And so as this announcement is given by Isaiah, this foretelling of what is to come, even in this word of prophecy, he's tying it back to this royal lineage. It's a really important connection and tie-in that made sense to the people because they always knew the promise of God is this is how the Messiah would show up. Now in this time, again, it's the same. It's a few pages over in our actual written Bibles, but the same things are swirling and happening for the people. There's still political chaos. There's still torment and threat from outside powers and kingdoms, military powers. The people are still going through the cycle of trusting God and disobeying God and crying out to God, and this whole cycle continues, and Isaiah is still calling them out for it and always pointing that while they're wandering in their darkness, he's still pointing to a light that is to come. And in this one, there's this promise of a child that is to come. And if you notice the attributes, Andrew, if you could just bring that back up again. If you notice the attributes that are listed here, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Those aren't just like normal descriptors like nice guy, reliable, shovels the walkway. Like these are descriptors that when they read them, they have this flavor of divinity, this flavor of authority. Even the government will rest on his shoulders, this sense of being able to handle the scope of what's happening. And so these are like, in this, there's this, again, this flavoring, this taste, this thread of hope that the people are picking up on that we may be like, oh, it really sounds like a Christmas prophecy, but this is what it's meaning to them. And their hope and expectation was that God was going to show up. But again, when? How many centuries do we have to wait? How many cycles of struggle, of pain, of abuse, of neglect, of famine, of torture, like all these things from a human level? God, when will you show up? Because the waiting for the fulfillment is the hardest part. It's good to announce it. It's easy to talk about. I have hope. But that waiting, God, when will you show up here? Okay, let me go to another one. Now let's go to Numbers chapter 24. I know we're bouncing around here a little bit. So this one is like a real interesting one for me. And some of you may not know the context of this because there's a guy named Balaam we're going to talk about here, and this is a prophecy of Balaam. But I want to always make sure that everyone is up to speed. I know different folks are in the room. Some have a lot of background and knowledge, some don't. So I always want to make sure we're tracking together before I read it. So here's what's happening in this context, in this time. The nation of Israel that had been slaves in Egypt for a long, long time had been wandering the wilderness, and they're now just on the outside of what we call the Promised Land. And they're in this area called the Plains of Moab, or the deserts of Moab. And the king of Moab, Israel has become this huge nation. And he's scared that this huge nation is kind of camping out in his area. And his fear is that, what if they come and they destroy us? And because the word is out, like it has been demonstrated over and over that anyone who attacks the nation of Israel, even as they're wandering, that God intervenes and helps them, that God has blessed them. And so there's this fear now from the king of Moab, like what happens if they come and want to take over my space? And so he comes up with this plan, and he summons this man named Balaam. Bit of a strange name, but he summons Balaam. And Balaam is kind of a sorcerer. He dabbles in witchcraft. He sees the future. He kind of is involved in the spiritual world. He's known as this guy who seems to have this supernatural ability that if he blesses something or someone, that happens, the blessing comes. And if he curses someone, the cursing happens. Now, he is not part of the nation of Israel. He's not living under the covenant between God and his people in this point. He is completely an outsider. But the king of Moab thinks, if I can get that guy because of his reputation to put a curse on the Israelites, then maybe we'll be safe. And so he offers them all the money, whatever you want, I'll give you. And Balaam says no, because God has told Balaam, you are not to curse that which I have blessed. And so Balaam, the story goes that God gives Balaam these instructions on what he's supposed to do, because now this guy who's an outsider is hearing from God, clear communication, and he notices there's a difference between the ways he hasn't been involved in the supernatural spiritual world before and the way God is now speaking to him. And so instead of doing what God says, he tries to take off. And the story goes that as he's taking off, he's riding his donkey, and he has two friends with him, and they're going along a road and then a path and then to a little trail. It's like it's narrowing. And in some weird way, God opens the eyes of the donkey. Just stay with me, okay? God opens the eyes of the donkey, and the donkey is able to see what we call an angel of the Lord blocking the path, blocking the road. And the donkey does not want to go. But Balaam's trying to flee from the instructions of God, right? And so he doesn't know what's in the road. He's like, all of a sudden the donkey stops moving. And so Balaam whips or beats the donkey, and the angel moves on. And then, so this happens 3 times. And the third time says that they cannot turn around. The path is so narrow they can't turn around, that the donkey just lays down. And Balaam tries to give it his best at this donkey. And then we read that God miraculously opens the mouth of the donkey. The donkey turns around and looks at him and says, why do you keep beating me? That's Matt's paraphrase version. Calls him out on his actions. And then Balaam comes to this realization that he has disobeyed God, and the story continues. Anyways, you should read it, and we should talk next week what you think about that one. But I'm giving you all the background, because normally when you think about a word from God, you think of the messenger being someone who's connected already kind of on the inside here, like Isaiah was, part of the nation. But here we have this really curious, not only funny story, but also this really curious example of someone that God is using and speaking to who would have been considered an outsider. And he is the one in this moment to deliver the words, this prophetic word pointing forward. So let's read this together, this prophecy of Balaam. So this is Numbers chapter 24. It begins at verse 15. It says this, then he spoke his message, the prophecy of Balaam, son of Beor, the prophecy of one whose eye sees clearly, the prophecy of one who hears the words of God, who has knowledge from the Most High, who sees a vision from the Most High, who falls prostrate and whose eyes are opened. Now watch this. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. So in this account, there's this vision. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. And then using this scepter and the star, these images of royalty, the scepter, this image of royalty. Remember, they knew that how this was all going to go. And the star, this real important symbol that jumps up again in the Christmas narrative, that all ties it all together. But in this moment, they probably would be thinking, who is this outsider to give us this word pointing forward to what was going to happen? Now, the ancient Jews considered this to be a prophecy about the future, the coming of their ideal and long-expected king, the Messiah. And the early Christians, as they began to look back and interpret these old texts, and then on that side of Jesus, recognized, Jesus is the fulfillment of all these things. So do you remember the story? And we're going to look at it in, not next, maybe in 3 weeks. I think, on the 21st, we're going to look at the story. There's a story where the Magi, what we call the wise men, they see a star, and they begin their traveling towards Jesus. The star and the scepter, this idea of coming towards Jesus, this long-awaited king. It's just a fascinating picture of this fulfillment of hope that we also pick up at the end. So the very end of the Bible, the last book is called Revelation. And it's this apocalyptic future vision that John has while he's on this island of Patmos and he's writing it all down. But there's this real interesting tie-in that I want to show you, because remember I started by saying there's threads of hope and the whole story woven all throughout the text. So at the very end, in Revelation chapter 22, we have these words, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and offspring of David. He is a part of the royal line and the bright morning star, which ties all the way back to these words of Balaam the outsider, this example in the Christmas narrative as the Magi come from a distant land, and Jesus announces that he is that person. Okay, oh man, I got to roll. I'm going to do this one really, really fast, okay? Because I don't want to miss it. I'm going to speak really fast too, okay? Micah chapter 5. Again, Micah was another prophet calling things out. He was a prophet around the same time as Isaiah, about 700 years before, okay? If I speak too fast, go on YouTube and watch it slow-mo after this. Okay, here we go. This is what it says. Micah says to them, "But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times." So this is a bit different because now we have like a geographic location. So we've often talked about that Jesus was a real person, God becoming flesh, at a real point in time, in history, at a real location, in a real world environment during the reign of the Roman Empire. It actually all kind of comes to one point in time. And this ancient prophecy, 700 years before Jesus, lands it in a geographic location. Now, Bethlehem was one of those towns. It was about 10 miles outside of Jerusalem. It was considered one of those, what good comes out of there? Like, you wouldn't really think much of it. I'm trying to think of like a New Brunswick example. I don't want to call out any towns, though. I'm very mindful that either you're from there or you know someone from there. I don't even know. But in Ontario, where I grew up, Windsor, Ontario was always considered the armpit of Ontario. So it'd be like, the modern day would be like, oh, who comes from Windsor? Although Windsor's a big city. But in this context, it'd be like, what good could possibly come out of Bethlehem, this small, insignificant, tiny town? Interesting though, King David was born here. Jesus from this royal lineage is also, as we know, born in Bethlehem, part of our Christmas story. So this is an announcement, 700 years before, locked in a geographic location about the coming of the Messiah, fulfilled then in Jesus. Okay, so I've blown the timing. We're not going to be able to pass the mics and have a conversation. I'll do better. I'll try to do better next week. I was just really excited about these prophecies. But let me just wrap us up here. My whole thing in working through some of these prophecies is that there's always been this promise of hope here. There's always, throughout the whole narrative, there's always been this sense that in the darkness, in the consequence of sin and disobedience, in whatever you're facing, there's still hope. Now the struggle is, but when is that hope going to be realized? It was the thing that the Israelites would have been dealing with for generations. And the thing on a human level that we would also probably say, like, when, God, will all this be just resolved? All this pain, all this loneliness, all this hurt. It's been a common question. There's songs about it, poets write about it. It's always all over it. And so I would like to just wrap us up by using the words of a prominent philosopher of our day, Tom Petty. Because when I was writing this week, I immediately thought of his song. It's called The Waiting. So I just want to read you a little bit. I'm not going to play it, but I'll read it for you if you know this song. It says, "The waiting is the hardest part. Every day you see one more card. You take it on faith. You take it to the heart. The waiting is the hardest part." Now you're probably all singing it in your head. The waiting is the hardest part. Love Tom Petty. So it's interesting, though, when I was thinking about this idea of waiting and longing, and I thought about this lyric. Now, Tom Petty is not talking about Jesus, right? Like, there's this sense of, like, romantic love involved in this song, this longing and expectation for the one you love, to be reunited, to be back together, or maybe it's this distant dream that you just want to see fulfilled and come together. But he's hitting on a very human thing, the waiting. That's the hard part. We can talk about hope, we can talk about expectation, we can hang on to it, but then life happens, right? The busyness, the struggle, the ups, the downs, the things that take our attention, and all of a sudden this idea of hanging on to hope kind of just disappears, and then we're left sometimes wondering, God, where are you? The ancient Jewish people for centuries would have been like, before I die, once before I die, Jesus is going to show up. It's got to happen in my generation, right? It's been 500 years, and then another 100 years, and another 100 years. They knew this promise. God had shown himself to be faithful Over and over in their collective story, God has shown up. But there's still this sense like, where are you? Are you really going to come? And I bet doubt starts creeping in there too. Now, we're on this side of the story, right? We get to come into Christmas knowing how it all goes, and Jesus arrives. And the thing with that is Jesus crushes sin, but the full fulfillment, the full realization of that has not fully been realized yet. So we're living in a both and, a now and not yet. So we recognize that Jesus, through his death and resurrection, has given us new life and hope. But we are still waiting, if you know the Christian story, we're still waiting for Jesus one day to come again, where everything will finally be put back to right. Everything, no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, everything will be right again. So in a different way, we're waiting still. We're not waiting for Jesus to show up. As followers of Jesus, we believe he's come. We're just waiting for him to come again. And so maybe in our kind of season of waiting, it's like, well, certainly before I die, right? Certainly before my next mortgage payment. Certainly before I have to have that hard conversation at work. Certainly before I have to deal with, you fill in the blank. We're still waiting. We're still wondering, God, where are you? When will you show up? Are you going to show up? Am I getting this wrong? Have I put all my eggs in the wrong basket? Is this really who you say you are? All these things can come up. I don't know what you're tired of waiting for. Maybe you're tired of waiting for answers on life decisions you need to make, relationships, family, a sense of purpose and identity. Maybe you're waiting for some kind of financial stability, the release of the daily pressure you're under, jobs, housing, food insecurity. Maybe you're waiting for healing, some kind of a physical or emotional or mental healing for you or a loved one. God, when are you going to show up? Waiting for reconciliation, broken relationships, forgiveness, waiting for some kind of relief and end to personal addiction or struggle, waiting for just, you say you're the Prince of Peace. My world does not feel at all peaceful or whole. Shalom. Waiting for justice, waiting for unity, waiting for spiritual awakening, waiting for, how about any kind of good news? Does it sometimes feel that way? So this is the good news. Genesis 3, first gospel, first good news, and we are still in this place of waiting. Yes, we see these threads of hope, this promise in the midst of pain, but God, when will you end all this? When will this be done? And so maybe for as much as for me this morning, and I hope for you as well, I just want to end with this verse from Hebrews chapter 10. This challenge to us in this place of waiting, of hoping, of expectation, of longing as we come into the Christmas season. It says this, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. In the midst of all of it, in the midst of the waiting, in the midst of the frustration and disappointment, sometimes we just need to remember that God is faithful. So wherever you are today, whatever that looks like for you, can I just remind you that over and over and over, God demonstrates his faithfulness and his proximity with his creation. He's not distant. He's not unfamiliar with your pain. He is fully aware. But you know what the hardest part for us as human beings is? The waiting. And feeling like, what if we're carrying this alone? And the good news of Jesus is that he reminds us over and over that you're not alone. He is close to those who are brokenhearted. He is around you, close to you, carrying your burdens with you. But the waiting is hard. So can you be reminded that he who promised is faithful? I want to wrap up by lighting an Advent candle. We're going to do this over the next coming number of weeks. So this is the Advent candle of hope. And the hope we have, because it was promised through the ancient writers and the ancient texts, realized in Jesus, but also the promise that one day Jesus is going to come again, and we have hope in that. And so we're going to do that. I'm going to light this, and we're going to do a responsive reading together as I light this. So would you stand with me as we share this closing prayer and responsive reading? And I'll light this candle for us as a visual reminder of the hope we have. From the very beginning, when darkness and doubt first touched this world, God spoke a promise of hope. Through the prophets, God declared, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and I will call him Emmanuel. A child is born, a son is given. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. A star would arise, a ruler from ancient times, born in Bethlehem. Today, we light the candle of hope. We proclaim that God keeps his promises. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Shine your hope.